So you're sitting on a massive cash pile of savings and you're really not too sure what to do about it. So what do? You log onto the internet, you go to Reddit, and you ask the personal finance gurus there what to do with your savings. 12 hours goes by and you get hundreds of responses, and there's a problem. They all have different answers. I mean, one person wants you to buy a taco stand, the next person wants you to YOLO it all into AMC and weed stocks. He's clearly a Wall Street bets guy. And then there's some wise guy telling you to invest it all in the rare fish market. Whether you got $1,000, $5,000, $25,000, or even $50K in savings, this is gonna be the definitive video on some of the best things that you can do with your savings. Even in the crazy environment that we're in with high interest rates, inflation, supply chain problems, and the threat of a recession, if your money is just straight up sitting in cash, it's really not doing that much for you, but losing purchasing power since inflation is around 8% right now. We always wanna make sure we're having our cash work for us, or at least have a plan for our cash. So if we are sitting on a large cash pile, that could be potentially fine so long as we had a plan for it. Like maybe we're saving to buy a house, saving for a wedding, college expenses. That's fine if you expect that you're gonna need it soon. Now, if you have no plan and you're just kind of stockpiling cash for no reason other than it looks good in your bank account, then I'm just not the biggest fan of that. So let's get into number one, which is to pay off any high interest rate debt with excess savings. So if you still have debt of anything over 10% of an interest rate and you're sitting on cash, you should be using a portion of those savings to start paying that off, because a 10% interest rate is known as a high interest rate, at least to me. And a lot of consumer debt like credit cards are going to be around that 15 to 20% interest rate range. Now, when it comes to paying off debt, there are two famous methods that I like to default to. One is called the debt snowball method, and the other is the debt avalanche method. For a lot of people that struggle with the motivation of paying off debt, you'll probably want to opt for the debt snowball method. So that's where if you have multiple lines of debt, let's say you owe money on a personal loan, a medical bill, a student loan, and then perhaps you have 2 different credit cards, you have 5 different lines of credit that you owe money on. In the snowball method, you're tackling the debt with the lowest balance first, regardless of the interest rate. So let's say your medical bill is $500, you would pay that one off first, and then after you pay that off, you'd go on to the next bill that you would owe, basically the second lowest amount on, and pay that off, and so on and so forth. And that way, it's kind of like a snowball, because once you get rid of that debt source, you're starting to build some momentum, and it's a little bit like less on your mind. If you have an overwhelming number of bills every single month, like if you had 5 or 6 bills that you had to pay, it's a little bit too much for your mind to handle, because you're always thinking about, oh man, what's the next payment I gotta make? And that's really, really tough financially and mentally. Now, there is a method called the debt avalanche method, and that's where it can save you the most amount of money, but it takes the most amount of discipline. That's where you're gonna pay off your debt according to how large the interest rate is, so regardless of the balance size in that case. So you would pay off the debt with the highest interest rate, then you would slowly move down the list. Now, this is a little bit scary, because let's say your biggest balance was $10,000. It might seem like you're making these payments on this big balance, but you're never really getting anywhere. That's the only downside of the debt avalanche method. However, you are maximizing your return on your dollar for paying off debt. In our example earlier, the 2 credit cards probably have the highest interest rate, so we'd want to pay those off first and make minimum payments on the rest of our debt lines. Once that's done, we can continue down the list. So basically, paying off debt is essential to getting a solid financial foundation. And if you have some extra savings, you should be using some of it to pay off any debt that you have. The next thing that you can do is to take some of your savings and contribute it to a retirement account. If you're noticing that some of your savings are going up at a fast rate, and if you aren't saving for retirement already, here are gonna be some of your options. First, you can start off with a Roth IRA. That's where you can contribute up to $6,000 a year. It's an individual retirement account, and basically the best part of the Roth IRA is that all your earnings and profits are tax-free. Now, I said you can contribute $6,000 a year. If you are over the age of 50, you can contribute $7,000 a year, but for the most part, you're limited to your contributions because of basically how good the account is. When you retire, you won't pay any taxes on any of the earnings in the account. The only other downside of the Roth IRA is that you need to wait until the age of 59 and a half to withdraw any of the money, or else you're gonna take a 10% penalty on those gains. So that's the first part. You can contribute some of your savings into a Roth IRA, but another option is to ask your employer to see if you can start contributing more to your 401k. The maximum you can contribute to a 401k is $20,500 for this calendar year, and you can start by telling your employer that you'd like to contribute a larger percentage of your paycheck to this account. By contributing to a 401k, you also get a tax reduction in the year that you contribute to it. So again, with the 401k, since it is a retirement account, you will need to wait until the age of 59 and a half to withdraw from it without penalty. But these accounts are great because they basically force you to save for later, which many Americans just are not doing these days. According to research by the Federal Reserve, they found that the median median retirement account balance in the United States, looking at those who do have retirement accounts, was only $65,000 in 2019. So that's pretty low, and if you watch my videos on retirement on the channel or how much you need invested to live off of your investments, you'll know that you need way more than $65,000 to live off your investments. So number 2 is increasing your contribution to retirement accounts or even starting a retirement account. But if you already have your debt paid off and a retirement account already fully funded, another thing you can do with your savings is to buy Series I savings bonds from the United States government. The interest rate for Series I savings bonds right now is 9.62%, and it's virtually risk-free because it's backed by the US Treasury. You can go to treasurydirect.gov, and the rate is good through October 2022 and even beyond because the new rates are set depending on inflation metrics. If you happen to be watching this video from, say, September 2023 or early 2024, please comment below with what the current rate is, but basically it's an adjustable rate depending on inflation. Now, there is a limit of $10,000 per calendar year on this savings bond, but the cool thing is that you can even buy it for others as a gift, like your children. So let's assume you buy the savings bond. There are going to be 2 key dates that you need to keep track of, and that's going to be year 1 and year 5. After year 1, that's when you can cash out the bond for the interest, but you will pay a 3-month interest penalty. After year 5, that penalty goes away because you're holding it for a longer period of time. So basically, the government is trying to incentivize you to save through the savings bond and fight against inflation. It provides a pretty decent return in the medium term, and I think it's a good option for many people out there that have some excess savings sitting around in their bank accounts. If you're interested in the Series I savings bonds, I'm going to leave some links in the description below for you guys to check out after the video. All right, the 4th thing that you can do with your savings, if you can afford it, is to invest your money. If you've never invested before, using a small percentage of your savings to get into the habit can be a good idea for the long term. If you're already invested in assets, you can use some of your savings to make your portfolio more complete and more diversified. So diversification is a core component of good investing because let's say you invested your entire investment balance in Crocs stock, for example. You're really risking the biscuit on a pair of shoes with holes as a design feature. It would have worked out really well during the pandemic, but recently you would have gotten a rude awakening with the stock price. A well-diversified portfolio means that you're investing in all types of asset classes and within your stock portfolio, hopefully across different sectors as well. So the idea of diversification is that if one sector of your portfolio like just tanks completely, at least you have 4 or 5 others to kind of bolster or buoy it up. So let's say you had 5 different asset classes in your portfolio and one of them was the worst performing one, real estate. Hopefully you still had 4 or 5 other asset classes to keep your portfolio afloat. So in terms of asset classes, there's real estate you can invest in, stocks, bonds, cryptocurrency, precious metals or commodities, and alternative assets like art. Certificates of deposits can also be good as well. In terms of allocation, investing always comes down to what your goals are. So for some of you that are risk averse, that might be a portfolio with 50% bonds and CDs, and the rest would be in precious metals. For a riskier type of investor with a longer term time horizon, they might have an allocation of 40% stocks, 40% crypto, and 20% alternative assets as an example. For 95% of people, investing in index funds or ETFs are a great way to diversify in the stock market without doing much work. An index fund is a type of pooled investment that you can buy in your retirement account or your brokerage account. The fund itself will invest into different sectors or indexes, and by buying into that one fund, you own a small percentage of everything that it owns. So a real world example is if you were to buy the S&P 500 index fund, by buying that one fund, you would own a small percentage of every stock in the S&P 500, thus tracking the entire index. That automatically provides diversification because your investment is now spread across 500 different companies, and buying an index fund is actually just way cheaper than individually buying each of those 500 companies on their own. So those are some options with investing that you can do with your savings. Now, number 5 on our list today is actually to fortify our emergency fund. An emergency fund is ideally an account that you do not touch unless for what the name implies, emergencies. So most people suggest 3 months of living expenses for an emergency fund. So let's say your total living expenses for every single month were $3,000. That would be $3,000 times 3 months or $9,000 total dollars. Now, if you have excess savings, what you can do is you can increase your emergency fund to 6 months or even 12 months of living expenses to be on the safer side. By doing so, this will give you much more peace of mind, even in a volatile market environment. And even if something catastrophic were to happen to us or a loved one, knock on wood here, we can handle the financial burden that might bring. I don't know about you, but I operate the best when I don't feel too pressured. So having a big emergency fund was a big priority for me, especially in my 20s. I think for me, it just really gave me the proper mindset to go out there and continue just to focus on making more income and grind. All right, number 6 today is to put some of our savings in a high yield savings account. Since the Federal Reserve is starting to increase interest rates, what you're gonna start noticing is that the banks that offer high yield savings accounts, they're gonna start following in step with the Federal Reserve and start to offer you higher and higher percentage yields on their savings rates. So Ally Bank is an online bank that usually has good high interest yields for savings accounts, and they're always being updated depending on what the interest rate is set by the Fed. The idea here is that if you're holding some cash, at least you're getting some return on your money, even though we won't be outpacing inflation, which is coming in really hot. Other great banks with high yield interest bearing accounts are Marcus by Goldman Sachs, and I even saw some new apps like SoFi offering a decent yield these days as well. So at least with a high yield savings account, if you do plan on keeping that cash liquid, at least you're gonna get a little bit of a return. And so as long as you have a plan for your savings, that's all that really matters. I'll link all the resources that we talked about today in the description below if you wanna check those out. Also, make sure to grab some free stocks using the link below. Check out my free newsletter where we come out with business news on Wednesdays and Sundays, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.